Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Shekinah Bashaw. For those of you who do not know me, I am a third year, wow, I'm getting there, third year doctoral student at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm originally from Delray Beach, Florida. That's where I was born and raised. And in Delray Beach, Florida, and while I was in graduate school, I've been able to create this new conference and this new way of spreading information. So it started out as the 1140 Glory Conference that comes from the 11 days it should have taken the Israelites to make it out of the Promised Land or into the Promised Land, out of Egypt in bondage, but it actually took them 40 years. So it has a biblical background, but it means so much. It is this reminder to make it to our God-given purpose, our God-given calling within 11 days as opposed to 40 years. And that glory really refers to more than just what we're able to succeed and achieve on our own, but it's the glory that others need. It's our work, it's our creation, it's our vision that this world is hungry for. So it's this reminder to get moving and get things done because it's bigger than us. It's bigger than ourselves. And out of 1140 Glory was actually born the Renaissance. And so the Renaissance Conference, we had our first official Renaissance Conference this past January, and it was an absolutely amazing experience in Delray Beach. And I think so many people walked away educated, engaged, empowered, and those are our pillars. That's what we aim to do. We aim to engage diverse groups of visionaries. We aim to educate those groups, and then on top of that, we aim to empower those groups to be able to accomplish and fulfill, live a life of purpose and fulfillment. So we started this webinar series in order to keep people engaged following the conference. So we've had a webinar on purpose planning. So that's taking your passion, pulling it out of your heart, putting it onto paper, assigning calendar dates to when you hope to have these things achieved, and gaining some accountability behind all of that. So we started with the purpose planning, then we moved on to empowerment sessions. We also had some entrepreneurship sessions, and now we have this session on podcasting, because podcasting is becoming more and more hot. I think a lot of us have things to say. We need to be able to find our voices and release our voices, because as I said earlier, it's more than just about us. It's about the world around us. It's about the communities in which we come from, the communities in which we hope to shape, and we're only able to do that by finding our voice and releasing our voice. So we're really excited today to have Johanna Lambert with us. She is a podcaster. I'll read her bio in just a minute. And she has been so kind enough to share her pearls of wisdom with us. And so hopefully everything that she has for us will help to take your ideas and your visions to the next level. And maybe if you doubted your ability to become a podcaster, maybe she'll be able to help out with that today as well. So thank you again for joining us for this Renaissance webinar series. We're so excited, and we're going to go ahead and dive in. So Johanna Lambert is the co-host of Views From the Chixx, a music-based podcast hosted by three women of color sharing their viewpoints on all things music. The show features interviews with fellow creatives and aspiring artists while engaging in thought-provoking conversations. Due to the overwhelming lack of female diversity in radio, she teamed up with her former college roommates to provide a platform for voices that often go unheard. By combining her passion for music with their appreciation of important dialogue, they have sparked discussions around mental health, industry politics, and what it truly means to follow your dreams. With no formal training, she edits and produces the show in the comfort of her own home. Between juggling a full-time job and podcasting, Johanna is also pursuing her second bachelor's degree in communication science disorders to become a speech language pathologist. Through this, she hopes to expand on the rehabilitative power of music through speech therapy. Podcasting 101 is our topic for today, and she will talk about how podcasting helped to find her voice. Her motto that she lives by is in order to win, you have to begin. So, with that, let's begin this webinar. I'm so excited for all of you here. Johanna, feel free to take it away.
Wow, thank you, Shekinah, so much. That was a beautiful introduction. It sounds so different hearing it read back to me that way. I'm like, ooh, okay. But thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to tonight's webinar. I'm really excited to be talking about podcasting. Podcasting, as Shekinah said, is booming right now. So this is the perfect time to get on it and get started. So to kick things off a little bit, I'm going to break it out into a couple parts. So I'll give you a little background on my story. Shekinah did beautifully touch upon a few points there. And then I'll move on to planning ahead, things that you need to know before actually starting your podcast. And then I'm going to hit you with the basics. How do you actually start it, and how do you actually bring the vision to life? And then I did forward over a few resources because I'm sure it's going to be a lot to take in all at once. So I did go ahead and take the initiative of putting it into a Google Doc format with all these resources and tools that you can use to actually start your podcast. All right, so let's begin. So a little bit about me. I have been podcasting now for almost, I want to say about 3.5 years now. It sounds crazy to even say that and reflect on it that way. But since 2016, and the reason why I started podcasting is because music is something that I've always been passionate about. So for me to say that podcasting is what led me to it, it's really the music that led me to it. Music is something I've always been passionate about, and I'm always looking for a creative outlet to express my love for music. Before podcasting, there was blogging, and I had a blog since I was probably in like middle school up through high school, onto college, and now it's transitioned into a podcast. So the reason why we started the podcast, so two of my other two co-hosts, they're actually my former college roomies. We're really, really close friends. I don't know if they're on right now, but hopefully they are. But we started this podcast because we all have a shared combined love for music. In college, we attended numerous shows across numerous genres, saw a lot of up-and-coming artists, especially attending college in Philadelphia. What a lot of people don't know is that Philly has a very rich music scene, so you get to kind of see firsthand what an artist has to do to basically pop off. And there's literally a music venue on like every single corner. So we were at concerts almost every other week, seeing everyone we possibly can. And what was great was that the shows were extremely cheap, like $25 to see MIA. Come on, you can't beat that. So one day we were having a conversation about music. I forget exactly what we were talking about, but we were on the phone for like 2 hours. And at the end of it, we're like, this was a really good conversation. We need to get this out there. How can we elevate this voice? It was crazy for us to even think that, like, yeah, more people need to hear that we're crazy, but we definitely wanted to get our voices out there. And that's kind of when podcasting was starting off. It was really new at the time, but we did our research and learned more about it. So we figured, so two of us, we live in Jersey. One of us lives in New York. So I think our first hump was getting over how do we actually record. We don't see each other all the time now that we're working and living in different cities. So what we did is we recorded remotely initially. So that was through Skype. And I will touch base on different ways that you can record in the next section as well. So going on to finding my voice through podcasting. So my voice is something, let's see, I've kind of always been trying to find, and I think it's a work in progress, especially as we're, adulting in life, I guess you can say. We're always finding our voices, and through this podcast, I've definitely been able to hone in on my opinion and, stand firm in the way that I view certain things. So growing up, I've always been more so the spectator, more so someone who's observing life, kind of like in the background, seeing how things are unfolding. I may have a certain viewpoint or a perspective on something, but I wasn't always someone who initially shared it right off the bat. So through having this podcast, especially because I am the one that's editing the podcast, I'm constantly hearing my voice back and back and back. And I'm just like, okay, you have some really cool and some really neat perspectives on these things. Like, you should really voice your opinion more, and you should stand firm in what you believe, regardless of who believes or agrees with it or not. So through the podcast, I've become more comfortable with my voice, especially how I sound and my opinions. And it's like, just knowing that they're valid. There's a need for this, and there are people out there who agree with you, or even if they don't, there's also something that you can learn by someone else's opinion as well, and that goes both ways. So that's how I was able to find my voice through podcasting. So how we got started and what we've accomplished so far with the podcast in terms of Views From the Chixx. So the one piece of advice that I definitely want to give to you guys is just start. Do not overwhelm yourself with all of the details, especially now. I'm sure there's a lot of information out there in terms of how to start a podcast. But honestly, once you have the idea, just research how to get started, which I will give you today as well. Just research how to get started and start. Do not overwhelm yourself with the little stuff. So the one thing that we figured out was how we're going to record, which we did through Skype, actually recording, and then finding a hosting site to upload our content. So this is moving on to the next section, which is planning ahead. So these are some things that you want to consider before you actually have a hosting site and record. So this is what you want to plan ahead for. So first thing, what's your purpose with this podcast? Is this more of a hobby? Do you want to use this podcast to supplement a business that you may have? There's, what's her name? The Budgetnista. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Budgetnista, but she is a financial guru and she has a podcast to supplement her business. So that kind of goes hand in hand. Some people take in information differently. Some people like to listen. You know, you can listen to the radio, listen to a podcast as you're cleaning up, as you're cooking. You know, that's a little easier to kind of soak in the information versus like watching a video per se. It's more passive, but you're still able to retain the information. So that's the way that she's able to promote her business, support her business through having a podcast. So also, are you doing this for fun? Is this just a hobby? A lot of people are just doing it for a hobby. For us, this started off as a hobby because music is something that we like to talk about. But through it, we found ways to kind of flip it into a business, and I'll touch base on that as well. So next thing, you want to focus on choosing a topic, a market. What is your podcast going to be about? So I think the easiest way to probably figure out what your topic is going to be is, what are you passionate about? What is a natural interest of yours? And then deciding on if you want to talk about that topic by yourself or do you want a co-host. Now, if you're recording alone or recording with the co-host, that is going to determine how you record. And when I say how, that means if you're doing it by yourself, you can record on your phone. If you have a co-host, now you have to think about a place that you're going to record at, or whether you're going to record via the internet using Skype or another platform. So decide whether you want to go solo, have a co-host, or if you're going to do a interview-based podcast, which is what a lot of podcasts are. So a lot of people who are talking about finances, or whether it be music or pop culture rather, they will do an interview-based podcast. So decide what your format is going to be in that way. So next, how will you record, which I touch upon in person or remotely, okay. And then now your episode format. So I think having an episode format will keep you consistent, focused, and it gives listeners something to look forward to. So one of my favorite podcasts is the Friend Zone podcast with Hey Friend Hey, Justin Ross, and Asante. And I really like their format because they have they go over like their health and wellness in the beginning. They do, I believe it's Music Man, which is where they talk about music, and then they do TV Land at the end where they go over entertainment. And they keep that format consistent throughout the whole show, which is what I like, because being a music person, if I'm not in the mood to hear about health and wellness, which I always am, to be honest, but if I'm not in the mood to hear about health and wellness, I can skip ahead and go to the Music Man segment. So I think having a format that works for you, especially what works for you and what you want to discuss, is important. So have a format, keep that in mind. And then lastly, in terms of planning ahead, I will definitely say keep your listeners in mind. Now, starting off, of course, you don't have listeners just yet, but think about the audience that you want to have and potential listeners. So doing a podcast, yes, you're doing it for you because this is something that you're interested in, but it's really for your listeners. Those are the people that are going to be engaging with your content, giving you feedback on the content. Especially if you're doing a podcast alone, you're kind of having a conversation with yourself while you're recording, but really you're talking to whoever's listening. And that's the same for co-hosts as well, of course. You're talking to whoever's listening and whoever's taking in that content. So I would say keep your listeners in mind. How is the content useful? Is it impactful? How are you servicing them? What kind of service are you providing? Is your podcast, is it educational, informative? Is it for entertainment, comedic relief? Is it an inspiring type of podcast? Like, those are things that you want to consider, because that is going to determine the type of content that you put out. So keep that in mind. So that's planning ahead. All right, now to the grits of it all, the basics, how to actually get started, which is what I'm sure you guys definitely want to get into. So this is the takeoff, bringing the idea from vision to actual podcast. So despite what everyone always thinks, you really, really don't need a lot to start a podcast, because what a podcast is at the end of the day, it's an audio file. That's really it at the basics of it all. You can add your intro and the little jazzy sound effects and all of the music you want and all that stuff. But honestly, it's really just an audio file. And I can literally go on my phone right now, record myself for 5 seconds. We're recording this right now, and you have an audio file. That's really what it is. So that leads back to my previous point about don't overwhelm yourself. So I'm going to go over a few things that you need to literally just get started. So first thing, you need a recording device. Now, your recording device could be your iPhone. Literally, just that simple. Voice Memos is the app that's built into your iPhone. That's really all you need. Record yourself, you save it, you email it to yourself, and then you can upload it somewhere, which I'll touch on as well. That's it. Your tablet, if you have an iPhone an iPad or another tablet, you can do it the same way that you would do on your phone. Now, if you have a laptop, which I'm sure most of us are using, you can record on your laptop. Those are your top 3 recording devices right there. Most of us have a phone, some of us have a tablet, some of us have a laptop. Recording device, part 1, done. Next thing you're going to need is a microphone. So this also depends on what recording device you're using. If you are using your cell phone, like the iPhone, you can literally just use your Apple headphones. Now, in comparison to other microphones, the sound isn't going to be super, super crisp, but again, this is just for you to get started and for you to take off. Now, if you're doing this solo, you can literally get the clearest of sound. Like, I have a friend who does a spirituality podcast, and her sound is so crisp, and I'm always like hitting her up like, what did you do? Like, how do you get your sound to sound like that? And I'm thinking she's recording in this like amazing studio type of setting, and she's like, no, like, Joe, I'm literally recording in my bed on my phone with my Apple headphones and my microphone's up to my mouth. Like, that's it. And I'm like, what? Like, I have to find it, and I'll send it to you guys if I can. But her sound quality is super crisp. So don't overwhelm yourself again. So microphone. So if you're using your laptop, there's a few microphones that most people are using. We have used rather, the Blue Snowball, which is pretty good. I think it ranges around, I think when we bought it, it was like around $60, if I'm not mistaken. There's also the Blue Yeti microphone, which is a little pricier. I think it's in the hundreds, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's the Audio Technica, which is a really great beginner microphone. And what's great is because it's sold on Amazon as well, and Amazon actually has a bundle pack which comes with a few optional equipment like the pop filter, which basically goes over your mouth. So if you're someone who, it like tones down the plosive. So when you're saying your P's and your B's and your D's, like it makes that less harsh. So that's something that's optional, but it's good to have, and it's good that it comes in that bundle pack. And there's about 4 other optional things as well, like an arm stand for your computer if you're recording from your desk. That's all included, and I believe that's less than $100 as well. So that's microphones. Now next, you're going to need headphones. Again, you can use your regular computer headphones if you're recording on your phone. If you're on your computer, I personally prefer over-the-ear headphones just because they kind of lock in the sound a little better than just regular AirPods. If you can get noise-canceling headphones, that would be great as well. And that's really great for if you're interviewing someone per se online, or if you have a co-host, you can hear each other much better and much clearer through the headphones without all the background ambient noises. So that's why I recommend headphones. Some people don't use headphones, but I personally feel like they're necessary, so I would use headphones. Okay, next is your recording software. So there's a few options depending again on what device you are using. So if you're using a laptop, which I'm sure is most preferable amongst most people, There is a website called Zencastr, that is Zencastr. And Zencastr is pretty cool if you are recording remotely. It's similar to Skype, but instead of it being a program that you have to download to your computer, it is web-based and it uses the cloud, I believe. I have used it a couple times when we were interviewing artists from like California or like Florida even. We did use Zencastr and we had no issues whatsoever with it. So it's really great. It records, I believe it records each track separately, and then you can put it all together in a editing software, which I'll touch on as well. You can put it all together on one track, or you have the option of recording everything as one simultaneous track. So that's pretty cool. You can also use Zoom. Look, we're using it right now. Simple. You can use Zoom. You can record it as video or audio if you want both. Some people have YouTube channels as well with their podcasts. Not necessary and not entirely necessary, but it's another social platform to have, so why not? Yeah, you can use Zoom. As you can see, it's very, very easy to use. You plug it in, dial in, depending on if you have a co-host or recording by yourself, use Zoom. Skype is also a popular one, probably the most popular. With Skype, when we initially started off with Skype, we had to use another program called Pamela. And so Skype allows you to have the conversation remotely. Pamela allows you to record that conversation. So at the time we were using Pamela. I'm not sure if they have integrated Pamela into Skype at this point since we have moved away from using that. But that is also something to consider. So Pamela, I believe, is just for PC. So note that as well. For Mac computers, Mac users, there's something called Ecamm Call Recorder, which is basically the Mac version of Pamela. It will record your Skype conversation. Okay, so that's recording software. Shekinah, we're good? Stop me if you good? All right. All right, so next we're moving on to editing software. Editing software, this is the fun part. I'm a tech person, so this is probably one of my favorite parts besides actually recording the conversation in the podcast. But there's a ton of YouTube tutorials on the various editing software that I'll cover here. There's Audacity, which is completely free, no money, free. There's a ton of tutorials on Audacity. It's very, very user-friendly. I used it for a majority of our podcast, probably the first year and a half, I want to say I was using Audacity. And it's really simple. You hit play, record, backspace. If you want to delete anything, it's literally like deleting anything from a Word document. You highlight and click delete. Like, it's really that simple. And there's a few other functions in order to make your sound a little more crisp. And if you want to add certain effects, like the jazzy stuff, there's some options in there as well. But definitely hit up YouTube for any more details on that. There's also GarageBand. Now, GarageBand is built into, I believe it's built into Mac. I have a PC, but I believe it's built into Macs, and I think you can get the app on your iPad or iPhone as well. So a lot of people record using GarageBand. They'll just record, if they're recording through voice memos on their phone or computer, they can email it to themselves, pull it up through the app, and edit literally right on the iPad or iPhone. You can also use iMovie if you're a Mac user or have an iPad. You can also edit in there. There's not as much editing features, I don't think, on the iMovie because it's more so for video, if I'm not mistaken. But if you do have a Mac, I would look into that program as well. So those are editing softwares. And again, YouTube and Google is your best friend. There's tons of people putting stuff on YouTube for free. I have no formal training in editing whatsoever. Everything is pretty much self-taught. And if there's anything I don't know, I'm Googling it, and then now I know it. It's really that simple. So next, we'll talk about hosting sites. So after you have recorded your episode, you've edited your episode, now you need to find a place for it to live, so to speak. How do you get it on the internet? So this would be your hosting site. We started off using SoundCloud, still use SoundCloud. It's very, very user-friendly as well and very simple to use. Now, the only thing I will say with SoundCloud is that the free version only allows you, I believe, up to 2 or 3 hours for free. So, for example, if you have a podcast that each episode is an hour, you're limited to only having 3 episodes on SoundCloud. And once you reach your cap of 3 hours, they're going to basically tell you that you need to upgrade to their SoundCloud Pro, which I think it's like 110 or 120. I think that's what we pay, but that's per year. So it's not bad because there's 3 of us, we split it up, and we really don't pay a lot for a lot of things in terms of the podcast. So it's not that bad, to be completely honest with you. So that's one thing with SoundCloud. Another hosting site that people use is called Libsyn. That's Libsyn. That's probably the more popular one. A lot of professional podcasters use Libsyn as well. It's a little pricier than SoundCloud, and I don't believe they have a free option. But I would look into Libsyn as well. There's another new one called Anchor, which is great. There's an Anchor app on the iOS App Store. Yes. iOS App Store. I believe it's on Android as well, and you can literally record directly into Anchor. I don't know if they have editing in Anchor, but you can literally record right into Anchor and then upload your recording into Anchor. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop. So that's really great as well. And then the next thing you want to do after that is, okay, you uploaded it somewhere. How do you get it into the directories? How do you get it shared? So the number one thing that people use is iTunes. So you want to submit your podcast to Apple Podcast. And basically when you submit it to Apple Podcast, Apple kind of has all of these deals with other podcasting directories, so your podcast will pop up there as well. Now, that doesn't include other websites like Spotify because that is their competitor, but there are other apps like Castbox, and there's a ton of other podcasting streaming apps that people use. People who don't have an iPhone cannot use Apple Podcasts, so they may use something like Castbox, or they may even stream directly through SoundCloud if they want to go that route as well. So that is for what was I saying? Submitting to Apple Podcast. I included a link on how to do that as well in the document. So next, you want to talk about branding and your website. Now, in the age of Instagram, I'm sure branding can seem extremely overwhelming, but when I'm talking branding, I'm literally talking about your artwork for your podcast, the color scheme, and I say color scheme because I think if you have a consistent color scheme, at least when you're making your graphics and promotional media for your podcast, people kind of start remembering that color scheme. So for example, ours is blue, pink, and yellow. So one time I don't know where we were somewhere and we ran into someone and we were telling them about our podcast. And they're like, oh, yeah, I remember that podcast. I saw that logo on Twitter. And it's because they remembered our colors, because we keep our colors very consistent. So our colors kind of tie into our brand. And we kind of just chose it at random and just stuck with it, to be honest. But when we do our graphics and our promotional media, we keep the theme very consistent. And it's very appealing to the eye as well. It's attention grabbing. So I would say color scheme. Also, your tagline and your motto for your brand. What is your tagline? We talk about music, so what is our tagline again? We talk about music, so ours is correlating, what is it? I'm sorry, I'm like blanking. It's correlating life in music with a little Grey Poupon and a splash of Avion and a whole lot of TED Talk, and that's a line from Kendrick Lamar. So we just kind of flipped the lyrics a bit to be our motto because we are talking a lot, hence TED Talk, and we're having conversations about music and life with our podcast. So that's kind of how that works. So just think of one that works to you. It can be witty and funny or whatever like that, or more serious. It's really up to you. You have complete creative control on how you want to do this. So your website. So with website, there's Squarespace. You can use a blogging website. Like we honestly still use Blogspot, which is completely free. Eventually, I'll probably transition over to Squarespace because I am the one maintaining the site. So I'll probably transition over to Squarespace because it's a little new, a little fresh, but we were really trying to keep our cost as low and minimal as possible. So we went with Blogspot, and it's been working for us, honestly. So having a website, I feel, is important because it's a place that houses everything. So it houses links to your podcast. So you can include links to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're hosting your website, you're uploading your website. You can include links to your SoundCloud page, all of your socials. Everything will basically be housed on your website. So if someone's like, hey, I want to listen to your podcast, how do I get to it? Instead of sending them all of these links, just send them the link to your website. So we're currently on a summer hiatus right now. So our website is currently down, but I did include the Linktree link, which basically links, it houses all of our links to the podcast and all of our socials. So that's also on the document. So having a website, important, okay? And then after that, we'll touch on promotion. So promoting the podcast. You have it created, you have it uploaded, you have your website, you submitted it to Apple Podcasts, you got your branding down pat, your website's up. How do you promote this thing? So number one, the top 2 social network sites that I think are important to promote your podcast, Instagram and Twitter. Instagram is really good for the promotional media. Instagram is attention grabbing. We know the main thing with Instagram is the imagery. How are you grabbing people's attention? So you're able to really have fun with like creating images and creating audio clips that you can upload to Instagram. Twitter is really good for conversation. So depending on the conversations and the content that you're having on your podcast, utilize Twitter. So for example, we had a discussion about what we were talking about. We had a discussion about mental health in terms of musicians and the things they go through, and especially new artists who have been, a starving artist for so long and how that affects their mental health. So we interviewed an artist and, we had an honest conversation about it. And then we posed the question to our Twitter following or people on Twitter, like, what do you think about this scenario? There's a lot of starving artists on Twitter who are also trying to spread their music. And we got a couple some feedback about how they feel being a starving artist and fighting for their big break, if you will. So it's just a cool way to kind of carry the conversation from your podcast to something tangible like Twitter, something that you can always go back to. And then based on the conversation that you're having, you can also use that as a promotional media. You can have like a snippet of the conversation, screenshot that conversation, and then promote it on Instagram. So now you're promoting, it's like cross promotion in a way. You're promoting your Twitter on your Instagram and vice versa. Third, I would say Facebook is important as well, but more so not necessarily for the podcast itself, but I think that Facebook has a lot of podcasting communities that are important. There's a lot of groups on Facebook that are very helpful. It's very helpful for people starting off their podcast. There's people who's probably in the same boat as you who want to pick your brain, or who may be looking for people to interview or looking for people to ask for advice in these podcasting communities. One of the ones that I frequent the most, probably because we are a women of color podcast, one of the groups that I like the most is Women of Color Podcasters. So that is a Facebook group geared towards women of color on Facebook, and it's women from all over the world, like all over. I was just chatting with someone the other day who is actually a Marine, and she's based in Australia right now, and she wants to start a podcast because she just wants a creative outlet. I can imagine wanting a creative outlet doing what she's doing over there as well. So you just connect with some really, really cool people and pick each other's brain and feed off of each other. And it's also a great way to support each other. Having support is very important because, let's face it, doing podcasting, it can take some work, but it also requires consistent motivation. And I think having a firm support group will keep you motivated and keep your eyes on the prize as well. So those are my top 3 social media websites that I think you guys should use. Now, for promotion in terms of graphics and promotional media, there is a website that we use often called Canva. So that's canva.com. So for those of you who don't have Photoshop or aren't really tech savvy with Photoshop, Canva is great because it has pre-made templates of graphics, and it'll tell you to pick a category. So like, is this graphic that you want to create specifically for Instagram? Is it for Facebook? And it has all of the dimensions already pre-embedded in there, which is really, really cool. All you have to do is kind of just click the template that you want, swap out the images or the colors and the font. It's just really cool. It's really cool to play around with. So you can have promotional media for all of your platforms, even your website. You know, a lot of people use Canva for various reasons. So that's probably like top to use. And it's free. This is all free. So that's great. For video clips, so because it is a podcast, you do want to have clips of the actual audio. So we use a website called Headliner. I think that's headliner.app. I also included that on the document. And what you can do is actually create a graphic from Canva and then clip the audio from your podcast. And it'll allow you to combine both of those things to create a really cool graphic or audio clip slash graphic, if you will. So it'll be like your graphic, but playing audio in the background. And it's cool because you can choose different fonts. You can have it have subtitles if you want. You can put your logo on the graphic. So it's really catchy, really eye-opening. And yeah, we love it. Canva and Headliner, top 2 for promotions. That's what most of the podcasters are using. A lot of top companies are using them as well, like CNN, Yahoo, MSNBC. I think Spotify even uses it. So those are the top 2, and they're both free. Canva and Headliner are both free for promotions. Okay, so the next, I want to talk about the process and trusting the process through podcasting. Now, this is something that my co-host and I, we are still processing, and we're still going through this, and I think it's just a constant going through. So the first thing I want to say is utilize your resources, and by that I mean all of them. People, the internet, Google, YouTube are your best friends. Utilize your online communities, your peers, and that's just for information, for promotion. You know, everyone's using social media to promote, which is obviously really, really great, but don't neglect the fact that you can literally email someone or text someone or have a conversation with someone in person about what you're doing. You never know who knows who. Someone might be a really dope graphic artist, and maybe if you want a logo made or artwork made for your podcast, and just having a conversation with someone, they're like, oh yeah, my coworker actually is a graphic artist and he's starting this new business and is looking for new clients. Boom, right there, now you have a conversation because you had that conversation with someone. So I would say utilizing your resources. Again, I will not stress this enough. Google and YouTube, especially YouTube, amazing. Use them. Next thing, the numbers. Yes, numbers matter, but honestly, your voice matters the most. So by numbers, I mean, do not get caught up in social media in terms of, oh my God, I don't have 100,000 downloads. I don't have 1 million followers. No one's listening to what we have to say. Like, don't get caught up in that, because honestly, a lot of people have these followings, large followings, but the people who are following aren't really engaging with their content. They're just following to follow. Like, Instagram even has this thing where it's like for a like follow me for a follow, but you're not really engaging with the content. And for me personally, and for my co-host, like, we want to have a core fan base, not just people to follow us that look good. And we're happy to say that, like, our fan base, they actually engage with us and tell us what they want to hear and tell us what they like to hear and how awesome a certain conversation was, or maybe even what they thought we would have talked about in a certain conversation. And that's the point of our podcast. That's what we like to have: engaging content and engaging audience. So the numbers matter in a way, yes, because of course it gives you visibility and I guess it looks good, but honestly, your voice is what matters the most, and connecting to your audience matters the most. And then another thing I'll say is create your own formula. So you may see, I'll take it back to Friend Zone podcast, for example. You see they may have like a super large following and you're like, oh man, I really, really want that. But honestly, you don't know what it took to get them there. And a lot of times, people like that who are starting podcasts, they already have a following. So for example, Hey Fran A, she's like a huge beauty and wellness person on YouTube. So when she did start this podcast with Asante and Dustin, her following migrated there. And she doesn't really do YouTube anymore. She's mainly on the podcast, but she had that following already. So I would say don't try to follow someone else's formula. Just kind of trial and error and figure out what works for you. And also, again, listen to your audience. What do they like? The more people that you connect with, the more your following is going to grow naturally versus just a number-based thing. So I'll say that. So next thing to remember in trusting the process, don't get caught up in, oh my God, it's been done already. I don't want to do this podcast. So what? Do it anyway. No one's going to do it like you. You are your own person. You are your own voice. You have your own unique ideas. No one is going to execute it the way that you execute it. One of the best advice that I heard, or best way to bring this into best way to visualize this, I'll say. Someone was talking about if you ever go to the grocery store and you go to the bread aisle, do you know how many bread brands there are? Do we really need that much bread? There's a lot of bread. So, you know, these bread companies, they don't care. They're just making their bread however they do it, and the customers will buy whatever they like. Some people like plain bread. Some people like white bread. Some people like multigrain. You know, there is a audience for that. So that's what I'll say. You are you, be you, and stay true to that. What else? Again, don't overwhelm yourself. Start off small and build as you go. There's so much that we have learned through our journey in podcasting, so much that we're still learning, even about ourselves or just the business of podcasting or where the podcast can take you. This has been an amazing journey. There's been ups and downs, but more ups than downs. Trust and believe that. So definitely start off small, start off with what you know, and build and grow and just soak in all the information you can. You don't have to have an end goal per se in mind in terms of, I want this podcast to eventually get me a television show. Like, that's great to have, but you don't really need to have an end goal in mind, because there's so much that you learn along the way. You'll start realizing that you have goals or aspirations that you didn't even know you had. There's so much that you'll learn along the way, trust me. Another thing, you don't need to spend a ton of money to get started. Look, I gave you guys so much knowledge on how to get started, and a lot of it doesn't really cost that much. I think the most you're spending is really probably the microphone, which isn't that much in the grand scheme of things, and that's a one-time fee right there. And then maybe the subscription if you decide to do Libsyn or the SoundCloud service, but honestly, that's really it right there. So you don't need a lot of money to get started. All you got to do is start. That's really it. Next, co-host. If you are doing your podcast with someone, which is something that I think we had to learn as well, definitely want to play to your strengths and know your weaknesses. So for example, between the three of us, I'm more the tech savvy person, which is why I'm the one that does the editing or like creating certain graphics or something like that. My other co-host, Kwana, she's more so the creative thinker, the inquisitive one. So she'll come up with certain topics that we're going to talk about on the podcast. She's really good at that, and inventing new ideas and maybe games that we can play along the way as well. She's really good at that. My other co-host, T, she is the communications person. She is a social butterfly. So if we're doing interviews with artists, or we need someone to touch base with artists and email them, or maybe if we're attending certain events, she'll be the one that's a little more outspoken and making the connection with people. That's kind of her forte. So we each play to each other's strengths, and we know our weaknesses. If we feel like we cannot do X, Y, and Z, either we learn how to do it or we turn to each other to do it. So if you have a co-host, that's something to keep in mind as well, because again, there may be 3 or however many of you, if you are doing a co-host and you guys have differencing of opinions or ideas. So I think playing to your strengths is important for a co-host. And then last but not least, for the process, trusting the process, is to have fun. Celebrate each victory, big or small. Reflect often along the way. Sometimes we get lost in the process, or maybe where we want to be, that we don't really reflect on how far we have come. So like with us, for example, there was a point in time where we weren't really getting a lot of interviews, or maybe concerned about certain numbers or our visibility. And we were just kind of thinking about ways that we can really put ourselves out there and maybe get in front of more people. And then a couple of weeks later, we got an email from management of Chef Aki. Now, I don't know if you guys know who Chef Aki is, but she is a celebrity vegan chef. And we got an email from her management saying that she wants to be on the show. And we're like, wait, what? Like, how did she even find us? What do you mean? And we have an interview with her. So check that out. And I know you guys are thinking like, well, she's not really music-based, because she's not. But she is a celebrity chef, and she has cooked meals for like Lenny Kravitz. And she's been on tour with a few musicians, preparing their meals and just making sure that they have a healthy, clean diet while on tour, or, you know, with their rigorous schedules. So we spoke about, you know, veganism and hip hop, and, you know, just being a musician and tour life and stuff like that. And then come to find out, which we didn't even know at the time, she is actually a singer, and she grew up in singing backup for Erykah Badu. So you never know. you never know who's looking, and just keep on going and have fun and reflect on your little milestones. So that's something that we look back on and are just like, wow, we really nailed that. We got visibility. Someone found us interesting enough. When we didn't even have the vision at that moment for ourselves, people were looking and they found us. Most of the people we have interviewed have actually contacted us, not the other way around. So it's been a really great journey. Again, have fun. It's a great way to connect with people in a field that you're interested in. So we're not necessarily in the music industry, but through the podcast, this is the way that we can break into that industry. So if you have an industry that you're interested in and you want to tap into that industry, you can create your podcast around it and then start interviewing people in that industry. Guess what? Now you're in that industry. It's really that simple. It's like a gateway in and creating your own back door. So keep that in mind. And that it's a learning process. So just soak it all in along the way. All right, so then to wrap things up quickly, why you need to do this. So with podcasting, what I probably love the most is that it is a creative outlet, and you have complete creative control over how you want to do your content, what kind of content you want to put out there, and when you want to put it out there. There's no like label or what have you, or company per se above you telling you what you need to put out there for their benefit. Like, this is literally for you and for the people that you're making the podcast for. And I just love having that creative freedom. So that's definitely why you need to do it. If there's something that you're passionate about, something that comes natural to you, conversations that you definitely want to have, do it. Go for it. Again, you get to break into different industries that you're interested in so many different ways. Your podcast can literally be about a multitude of things. You don't have to be specifically about music or specifically about finance. Some podcasts split their episodes up into segments. One segment may be about finance, one segment may be about music, and that allows you to have a broad range of conversations in that one episode. So I just like having that creative freedom. And then also it's a way to challenge yourself, to grow and to learn. Like, this is something that's very new, and podcasting is definitely popping off. So I would say jump on it now. The only time to start, or the best time to start, is now. Don't wait until later. You have the vision. It might be on the tip of your tongue. Just get everything down on paper, plan it out, and get started. And that's what I got.
Wonderful. Thanks, Johanna.
No problem.
I want to open things up for questions. If folks have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask any questions you might have. There's also a space in the chat room if you are online to post a question if you have a question. I think we can probably do a follow-up email with the resources. And I'll put together a PDF document with all of the resources, the recording materials, the editing software, the hosting sites, so we can share that with everyone as well. The only other thing I want to ask a question about, I don't know if you can speak to how people make money podcasting. Does that require a lot of followers, and then you go and you get people to put ads onto your podcast?
Let's see. Okay, well, making money through podcasting, that's honestly something that we're working through now, because we see that there is a way to make money through podcasting. Through my research, what I'm finding, a lot of people use Patreon. That's patreon.com. And the way that works is that it will require you to have some sort of following, but the way that works is that your followers basically pledge a certain amount per month or per episode to your podcast. So say you charge everyone, I don't know, like $2 per episode. Each follower will pledge $2 per episode, and each time you put an episode out, that one follower is putting out $2. So if you have one follower, that's $2 per episode. But if you have 100 followers, 200 followers, that money multiplies right then and there. So you can put that money, funnel it back into your podcast, or even funnel it into, if you want to do merchandise, or eventually if you want to record in a studio or something like that, or host events for your audience, you can funnel the money into it that way. I also saw that some people do sponsorships. So if you have someone who's, I don't know, promoting a new book or maybe selling a certain product, you will give them your rate, and then they will basically purchase like a minute or so time slot, and you'll charge them for that minute slot in your podcast. So that's what I've been finding right now, but honestly, we're still at that phase of how to make money.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. I think the other question I had was about content. So, how many episodes in advance do you all plan for, if at all? And then how many episodes do you do per week, or do you set like a goal for yourself per month, per year? How does that work?
Yes, definitely. So right now we are on summer break. We'll be back at the end of August, but we usually put out episodes once a week. And we did choose a date just to keep ourselves consistent. So that is Wednesday. So we put out an episode once every Wednesday. Usually that goes out in the morning or the afternoon just to catch people on their either morning or afternoon commute. So that's probably when most people are listening. So we do that once a week, and we usually we actually use Google Docs, and I have an Excel spreadsheet. You don't have to do this, but this just works for us because there's 3 of us, so it's hard to kind of lose track. But I have an Excel spreadsheet that lists out the date of every Wednesday and what episode will be released that day and what we're recording that week as well. So the way that we record right now, we actually do record in a studio only because we just wanted a different atmosphere. We were doing remotely for so long, and we knew someone who was recording at that studio, so it just worked out. That's the only reason why we're there. But when we are at that studio, we're given 2 hours. So we do record 2 episodes in one sitting. So that way we have 1 episode releasing that week, and then we can schedule the next episode for the following week. So we always have something kind of constantly in rotation.
Beautiful. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like I had another question, but I think I lost it. But this has been really helpful. Hopefully you all feel inspired to start a podcast. I think that, as Johanna's model goes, if you want to win, you have to begin. So hopefully you all are ready to start. And as she said in the very beginning, if you're wondering how to start a podcast, the number 1 step is to just do it and just start it in the first place. So I hope that you all feel that you've gotten a good amount of information to do so. And I think I just recovered my last question. How long does it take you? So you record an episode for an hour. How long does it take you to put everything together and put it out? So the editing and all of that.
Now that varies on what we're talking about. See, to be honest, I'm a very anal person, so I'm probably stressing over the most minor thing when it comes to editing, especially when I hear my own voice, to be honest.
Gotcha.
But, it could probably take up to maybe 2 to 3 days, given the time that I have. If I'm doing it, I could do it in one setting, but I like to break it up and focus on different parts. So we do have intro music, and then we have the podcast episode, the actual episode. And then if we are doing a interview, it also depends if we're doing the interview remotely or in person. Now, if we're doing it remotely, usually we have the interviewee, I guess. The interviewee is on one track, and then we are on a separate track. So it takes a little bit more time for me to kind of morph both of our tracks into one, versus if they are in-house with us, then it's just all one track, and that editing is pretty quick. So it really doesn't have to take that long. I'm just very detail oriented when it comes to things, and very hands-on. I'm kind of a perfectionist, so that's more my thing. But it could literally take you anywhere from, I'll say, a half an hour to 2 days, 2 to 3 days, depending on what time you have.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. Well, I think that's all the time that we really have now. I want to encourage everyone to follow and check out Johanna's podcast, which is Views from the Chixx. That's CHIXX. I'm sure that you all will enjoy it. And thank you so much, Johanna, for being a part of the Renaissance webinar series. We will be back next month. So if you all are interested in a special episode about anything, we were thinking real estate next, talking about purchasing a home, or if you all want to do something more focused on purpose and empowerment, August is the 8th month of the year, and a lot of times we like to talk about new beginnings during that month. So if there is something that you'd like to hear from the Renaissance webinar series, please let us know. We enjoy reaching out to people, or if there's a speaker that you'd like to hear and pull on some wisdom from, please reach out to us at therenconf@gmail.com. That's THERENCONF@gmail.com, and we will be sure to work on a special webinar session just for you.
All Perfect. Right. Well, thank you, Shekinah, so much, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. I hope everyone has a great night.
Have a great night, too. Thanks,
Bye.
Sherry.
Welcome. Bye.